recording started. Okay. All right. So good evening. And tonight's shiur, as always, is in memory of Lilu Nishmat Avi Mori Dov Ber Meir Ben Reuven Halevi Imi Morati Rachel Bat Harav Michael. And tonight we are talking about the Parsha of Ki Taytzay. And one of the things that I found very interesting in the Parsha Ki Taytzay, which, by the way, has more mitzvot than any other Parsha, lots and lots of mitzvot. I noticed that there were two specific mitzvot which appear very close to each other, which both have this phrase "V'zacharta ki eved hayita be'eretz Mitzrayim." So I wanted to focus on that pasuk, which appears actually 5 different times, all in Sefer Dvarim. As a matter of fact, the word "v'zacharta" appears 7 times in the Torah, all of which are in Sefer Dvarim. And most of them, as I said, 5 of the 7 refer to this specific pasuk. So I'm going to go through. There are 5 different mitzvot. You'll notice they're in 5 different places in Dvarim, Perek Hey, Perek Tedvav, Tedzayin, and 2 in this week's Parsha, and Perek Chaf Daled, very close to each other. All of which have this phrase of "V'zacharta ki eved hayita be'eretz Mitzrayim" or "V'zacharta ki eved hayita b'Mitzrayim." So having said that, I'm going to go back and go through each of these 5 mitzvot briefly. And we're going to try and see if we can understand why these specific 5 mitzvot seem to have this concept of helping us remember or are to remind us of Yetziat Mitzrayim, or of Mitzrayim, or that we were of a demon Mitzrayim, more so than that Hashem took us out of Mitzrayim, it seems. So the first of these mitzvot is the mitzvah of Shabbat, as it is written in the second set of Luchot. Interestingly enough, as we've talked about in the past, Shabbat is the mitzvah where the Aseret HaDibrot, where the 2 versions of the Aseret HaDibrot seem to be most disparate, as opposed to others where they're almost identical or identical. And the interesting thing here about all of these, you'll notice that this phrase "Asher tzivcha Hashem Elokecha," Shabbat LaHashem Elokecha, and again the whole concept of Shabbat not doing any melacha. We're familiar with the Aseret HaDibrot, but again the reason given for it here is "Zacharta ki eved hayita be'eretz Mitzrayim." The reason we keep Shabbat is to remind us that we were avadim in Mitzrayim. Hashem and Hashem took us out of Mitzrayim beyond Chazakav Yisrael and Netuyah, specifically with all of this power, this strength of Hashem. Al Kain, therefore, Hashem has commanded us to lasot literally means to make the Shabbos day. So that lasot is interestingly enough appears, or some version of it appears almost in all of these. Again, here in this one we have Shamarta v'asita. Here we have again the same la'asot et hadavar hazeh, la'asot et hadavar hazeh. In all of these things, Hashem has commanded us these mitzvot we do something to remind us of the fact that we were slaves in Mitzrayim. Okay, and the first, as I said, of these is Shabbat. The second is a very interesting one we're familiar with from Parshat Mishpatim, but this is the Devarim version of Eved Ivri. Tells us in Parshat Re'eh ki mocher lecha chicha ha'ivri o ha'ivriya, if your brother, the Ivri, or your sister, the Ivriya, is sold to you, v'avodcha sheish shanim, they will work for you for 6 years. Uvashana shvi'it tishalchenu chavshi meimach. The 7th year they go free from you. They go free. But again, here in that we know that mitzvah already from Parshat Mishpatim. The added part that's added in Sefer Dvarim is Ki shalchenu chavshi meimach lo tishalchenu reikam. You, as the owner, as a person who purchased an Eved Ivri, have an obligation when you set them free after 6 years not to send them empty-handed. Hanek tanik lo mitzoncha migorncha miikvecha. Again, this phrase, Hashem erachecha, Hashem elokecha titan lo. From the blessings that Hashem has given you, from your sheep, your vineyard, from your granary and your vineyard, all of these things that Hashem has blessed you, you should give some of this to your servant who worked for you for 6 years. When they go free, you don't send them away empty-handed. Again, the reason is interestingly enough, here it's not Vayotziacha Hashem Lokecha, it's Vayiftecha Hashem Lokecha. Hashem redeemed you. Therefore, we have this mitzvah. The third of these mitzvot, again, is also in Parshat Re'eh in the section of the Chagim. We are told about the Chag of Shavuot. So we are told, Shiva Shavuot Tispar Lach. We have to count 7 weeks from in Emor. We are told we count 7 weeks from the cutting of the Omer. Here it is Me'achel Charmesh Bakama. When the crops start to be growing to the point where they're harvestable, then we begin Tochelis Par Shiva Shavuot. We count these 7 weeks via Sita. Chag Shavuot LaShem Elokecha. We should make the Chag Shavuot to Hashem. Again, this phrase of Kasher Yivarechecha Hashem Elokecha, that Hashem has blessed us. Again, we should rejoice before Hashem. Again, all of you, your children, your servant, your Amma, which we had the same thing. We had by Shabbat, the same phrase here. We have it here. But here it adds when it comes to the Chag of Shavuot, we add the Levi, the Ger, the Atom, the Almanah, Asher B'kirbecha, or in your midst. We have to do this in Yerushalayim, where Hashem has placed his rests his Shekhinah. Again, third time in the Torah that we find this. We have to remember that we were an Eved in Mitzrayim. That's why we have this mitzvah of the Chag of Shavuot, not the Chag of Pesach, remind you. The Chag of Shavuot, the Torah here links to remembering that we were an Eved in Mitzrayim. Okay, then we have in our parsha, we have 2 specific mitzvot that have this similar phraseology. One is Lo Tatem Mishpat Ger Yatom. The second is Lo Tachbol Meged Almanah. These 2 mitzvot go together, that we are not allowed to pervert the justice of a stranger or an orphan, and we're not allowed to take as a pledge a beged almanah. We should not a garment that belongs to a widow. We are not allowed to take as a pledge or do any. We should not do any harm to this. Again, why? Same exact phraseology. Again, here again, Hashem redeemed you. Therefore, Hashem has commanded us to do this mitzvah. And the final time this occurs in the Torah, also in our parsha, which is, again, you'll notice they're only 3 psukim apart. This is pasuk Yud Zayin in Perek Chaf Daled. This is pasuk Yud Chet. There's one pasuk in between, which perhaps we'll get to later, and then we get to the next set of mitzvot, a new paragraph. Ki tachbot zeitcha. When you are gathering your olives, lo tefar acharecha, you should not take certain parts of the olives, like you have to leave them for the stranger, the orphan, the widow. They should be similar. Ki tivtzar karmacha. When you again when you harvest the grapes from your vineyard, lo te'olal acharecha, you should not collect the olalot, the small remaining fringes, the edges of the vine. Same exact phraseology. And again, okay, so I wanted to focus on these 5 mitzvot, see if we can find something that perhaps that they all have in common, or what their relationship is, and what is the object of specifically reminding each of these that there is a connection to being slaves in Mitzrayim. So I'm going to start with the fact that if we look at each of these mitzvot, most of these, there seems to be a duality of the mitzvah. So, for example, if we start with Shabbat, we have Shamor at Yom HaShabbat Lekadsho. We have to observe Shabbat. Lotasa Kol Malacha. So there's a positive aspect of Shamor, of something we're supposed to do to guard the Shabbos day. And of course, we know that the parallel in Shmo tells us Zachor at Yom HaShabbos, remember the Shabbos day. So we have Shabbos has a positive aspect and a negative aspect. And here again, this is connected to leaving Mitzrayim. The second one here is the fact of Eved Ivri. Again, Eved Ivri we were already introduced to in Parshat Mishpatim. Here in Sefer Dvarim, we have an added mitzvah of Lo Tishalchenu Reikam, we're not allowed to send this person who worked for us for 6 years free without giving them some parting, I would say parting sustenance to start them on their way back to, it seems, economic independence, because they've been totally dependent on us for the last 6 years. They need a fresh start. We are supposed to give them a head start to start on their way back to financial independence. And that is, again, it starts as a negative command of lo tishalchenu reikam, but it ends up with a positive command of hanek tanik lo, that we have to give something to them. The exception to that is going to be the Chag of Shavuot. There's nothing, seems to be no negative. This is strictly a positive commandment. We have to make the Chag of Shavuot. We have to rejoice. What the connection of this to Zohar Takir Yisrael? Good question. Haven't really figured that one out yet. But then we go to the other two. Okay, Lo tatem mishpat ger yatom, lo tachpol beged almanah, each of which are negative commandments which seem to have a positive side to them. So, example of lo tatem mishpat ger yatom, we're not allowed to pervert justice. If we think back to last week's parsha, which Shoftim v'Shotrim, we had this concept of tzedek tirdof, that we have to, when it comes to judgment, we have to pursue justice all the time. And I think perhaps when we talk about lo tatem mishpat, even though we, again, the same thing we had last week when we talked about judges and judicial procedure, it's not only in a courtroom, it's any time that you are involved in any business dealing, there is an aspect of making sure that you are properly treating these other people. Again, the focus here is the ger, the yatom, the almanah, the underprivileged, or the people who it's very easy, in theory, to take advantage of because they have nobody to stand up for them. The ger, the stranger, has no family member who's going to stand up for him. The yatom, the orphan, has no parents who are going to stand up for them. The almanah, the widow, has no husband who is going to stand up for her. These are all people who are theoretically on the fringes of society, or potentially in a position where they have no voice in the halls of power. They can easily be abused, and the Torah wants us to avoid doing that. And it reminds us, again, and that's why here it's very obvious why us remembering that we were the underprivileged class in Egypt, the ones who were oppressed, the ones who had nobody to speak up for us, and Hashem specifically redeemed us. From there, that is a very, very strong connection to the mitzvot here that we have. These are specific mitzvot of not taking advantage of somebody who is in a position where you might be able to take advantage of. Very important that the Torah again connects this to going out of Mitzrayim. Similarly, when it comes to, and here it's in Ki Taytzay, again, this emphasis on the ger, liyatom, the almanah, on making sure that we leave them not necessarily the best of the crops, but a portion of the crops for them to sustain themselves. We have all sorts of different mitzvot relating to the gifts in the agricultural gifts that we're supposed to leave for the poor. And these mitzvot here are specifically linked to, again, this concept of Zacharta Eved Hayita Be'eretz Mitzrayim. Remember that you were Avadim in Mitzrayim, you had nobody to stand up for you. Now, interestingly enough, the phrase Vayiftecha Hashem Elokecha Misham does not appear here in this one. It does appear in the first one where we talk about the Yatom and Almanah. We have this Vayiftecha Hashem Elokecha Misham, that Hashem redeemed us, to specifically give us a rationale why we're not to oppress those that are not in positions of power in society, or are specifically our positions of no power in society. Yet when it comes to leaving for the gifts for the poor, we don't have to remember that Hashem redeemed us. It's important just to remember how poor we were when we were in Egypt and we had nothing. So that seems to be enough. You don't need to remember the Vayiftecha. Now, similarly, now when we go back to the Chag of Shavuot, you'll notice again a very interesting link between these last two that are in this week's parsha and the one that we had in Parshat 2 weeks ago, this ger yatom v'almanah, that when we rejoice before Hashem, when we rejoice for Hashem on the Chagim, we have to remember the ger yatom v'almanah. Those that are not blessed with the means that we have to share with them. So perhaps that forms the link to this concept of matanot lo'nim ki taytzay lagel yatom v'almanah. And again, perhaps that's why again the Torah emphasizes here again, there's no vayiftach Hashem elokecha, not that Hashem redeemed you. Remember how poor you are. So when it comes to helping the poor, okay, we have to remember just that we were slaves in Egypt. So if you look at the Chag of Shavuot, where we're talking about rejoicing in our good fortune, and not forgetting those who are less fortunate than we are, then we have to just remember that we were slaves. Same thing here when we're giving matanot la'aniyim. We talk about this chapter of matanot la'aniyim. When we're leaving a portion of our crop for the poor, all we have to remember is that we were slaves in Egypt, because that should be enough to give us that impetus to realize the importance of these mitzvot. When it comes to not perverting justice or not taking a pledge from a widow, there we need something a little bit more. We have to remember that not only were we slaves, but that Hashem redeemed us. And that is enough, should be enough to remind us, wait a minute, don't think you can impress others, because Hashem always looks out for those who are oppressed. And that's the concept, I think, why it adds here, Vayiftecha Hashem Elokecha Misham. And that's why here, by the Eved Ivri, when I let somebody go after they've worked for me for 6 years, and I give them a financial head start toward their new life, again, it says, Vayiftecha Hashem Elokecha. Again, we have this concept that Hashem redeeming us, which reminds us that Hashem is watching out for the underdog. So we should also be watching out for the underdog, that we don't take advantage of the underdog. Shabbos seems to be in a different category, even though we connected with Mitzrayim. It seems here it adds more. It's not the fact that Hashem redeemed us doesn't seem to be enough. It's the fact that Hashem took us out with great signs, with a yad chazaka, that is why we should be keeping both aspects of the Shabbat. Interestingly enough, again, if we go back to Shabbat and we go back to Yaseret Dibrot and Yitro, it doesn't connect Shabbos at all to Yetziat Mitzrayim. It connects it to Maseh Bereshit, to Hashem creating the world in 6 days and resting on the seventh, and that's why we have Shabbat. And so if we think about Shabbat more so than these other mitzvot, there are two different aspects of Shabbat. There's an aspect of Shabbat of Zecher L'Maseh Bereshit. There's an aspect of Shabbat of Zecher L'Yetziat Mitzrayim, that both of these are joined together in Shabbat, because Shabbat is really Hashem's gift to us, as opposed to all of these others of the Eved Ivri, even the Chagim, Yatom Amanim, all these others where we're helping others. Shabbat is Hashem helping us. But again, this connection back to Eretz Mitzrayim, with the fact that we were downtrodden, we were forgotten, and Hashem saved us and took us out. That is why, again, we are connected to Shabbat, because I think Shabbat needs, because it's such a fundamental part of who we are as the Jewish people and how we connect to Hashem, we have to always focus on the rationale. It's not enough to just say, oh, great, Shabbos is here, let's rest, let's sleep. That's not enough. We have to be focusing on Shabbat in the context of, why are we keeping Shabbat? What's Shabbat all about? And what are we supposed to be accomplishing? Because again, there's this concept of, where is it? We have to make Shabbat. It's not just enough Shabbos is here and that's it. We have an obligation la'asot. And it's the same thing that's connected very closely to all of these other mitzvot, la'asot, la'asot et hadavar, la'asot here again, ve'asita here. All of these things are, we have to make ourselves worthy of Hashem's bracha, because Hashem took us out of Mitzrayim to give us that ability, to give us that independence. So as we go through all of the mitzvot, and even though this pasuk only appears in these 5 places, I think to an extent, all of the mitzvot where we are focusing on social justice, we are focusing on not oppressing the poor, not oppressing the stranger, which appears more than anything else, this concept of ger lo tonev lo tilchatzenu. We're not supposed to oppress the stranger. We're not supposed to oppress the poor, the widow, the orphan. This is a concept that appears throughout, not just Sefer Dvarim, but throughout the Torah and the mitzvot. And it's to connect us back to our roots, to make us realize that just because now we have been blessed by Hashem, we should not forget those who haven't yet reached the financial blessing or the emotional blessing or the other rewards and blessings that Kadosh Baruch Hu has granted us. And I think that's primarily this focus of Zacharta. By remembering our past, we have a much stronger link to our present and a much stronger connection and reason that we want to have a future. I think that those all bring everything together here in these mitzvot that as we look through. And we look through Shabbat, we look through Chagim, we look through how we treat others, whether they are underprivileged or underprivileged emotionally. In the case of the Yatom and Almanah, it doesn't say, by the way, that we're not allowed to take advantage, that we're only not allowed to take advantage of a Yatom and Almanah who are poor. It's any Yatom and any Almanah because they are going through a challenging period of time in their lives. They are Yatom. They've lost somebody. They're Almanah. They're widowed. They don't have somebody in their lives. They've lost something. It's not just relating to their financial status. It may be their emotional status, their ability at this point in their lives for somebody to be there. They need somebody to be there, and they're very vulnerable and very easy to be taken advantage of. And that is exactly when we have to remember that it's not only about us, it's about remembering our link to Hashem. When we have the ability to help others instead of hurting them, to be there for them, to support them, and we abuse that instead of using that as an advantage to help others, then we've missed our calling as Hashem's people. And that's why I think these mitzvot specifically are linked back to this concept of Zacharta ki Avedi Beretz Mitzrayim, that our connection back to Mitzrayim is why we are supposed to remember that and have this relationship with Hashem that includes all of Hashem's creations. And when we understand that, then we can come and approach Hashem and ask for him to continue sending us those blessings. Because if we abuse the blessings, then we aren't worthy of Hashem granting us those blessings in the first place. So we hope and pray that we will learn all the lessons of this week's Parsha, including these important lessons of remembering our past so that we can live the present and anticipate a very, very fortuitous and fruitful future, a future that will include the Kula Shlema Meher of Yameinu. Thank you very much. And I now open the...
Aaron, sorry, can we go back